Hi everybody, this is my 125 gallon tank, and tonight we are going to talk about feeding our fish. And while we do so, we're going to go ahead and do a feeding video and get everybody fed tonight. So we're going to start with my Tetra Pro color enhancing flakes, and that is for just about everybody in the tank, even the ones that sink to the bottom. Will feed my catfish and stuff that are down there on the bottom. I do eventually put some algae wafers in there, or possibly some sinking shrimp pellets, but just something that will directly make it to the bottom to feed my bottom dwelling fish. But I also have a Tennocona in this tank, an African spotted leaf fish, and they are more of a predatory fish. They go after smaller fish, insects swimming around on the surface and stuff like that. So for that fish, I have to put floating pellets in there. I have got it trained to eat pellets rather than live food, but I usually wait till it comes around and we can kind of see it sort of creeping in looking for food, and I'll go ahead and put the pellets in for it once it comes over. In the meantime, what I wanted to talk about was the idea that our fish in a lot of cases can find food for themselves in our aquariums, and we don't actually have to feed the fish nearly as much as we really feed them. I will be the first one to admit that I'm very heavy-handed when I feed my fish. It's kind of like giving treats to the cat or anything else. You spoil them, you tend to give them more. So you know, I know I do feed more than I need to, but I don't think I feed so excessively that it causes any issues with my tank. There's a Tennocona starting to creep around. Let's see if he comes over when he knows that his food's coming into the tank. I usually tap the container on the edge of the tank a little bit gently, and that noise lets him know that the food is coming in. A lot of times he'll come over and make an appearance from that. So when I'm feeding my fish, I take into consideration what fish I have in the tank and how the tank is set up. If I have fish that are algae eating fish, such as mollies or guppies, and I've got a lot of algae growing in the tank, I don't need to spend so much time feeding those fish because there's a viable food source for those fish in the tank. The off-flux grazers, you know, like fish like rubber lips or bristlenose plecos that scrape the surface clean, they're feeding off the off-flux or the surface growth that's growing on the glass, on the rocks, on the woodwork, and they're getting food from that. So while I wouldn't necessarily recommend allowing them to only eat that, I would certainly still put either fresh vegetables or algae wafers, occasionally some meatier type stuff like sinking shrimp pellets are never a bad idea to put in there to get to the bottom of the tank for those kinds of fish. But if you've got those kinds of fish, they do get a pretty good food source all day, every day in the tank. They can just feed in the tank. So not only do we not have to feed as much, we don't have to feed as often. I generally don't skip any days. I know a lot of people do. I usually feed every day. There are days where, believe it or not, I do forget. I look up and I realize it's already 10 o'clock at night and I never got around to feeding the fish tonight. And so sometimes my fish go a day without eating, but it's not a deliberate fast. I know a lot of people will pick one day of the week and that'll just be a fast day for their fish. Some people say that's good. I'm not really sure what the benefit of that is supposed to be. I know it will certainly encourage your fish to find natural forage within the tank, and sometimes that's good. If I'm feeding my off-flux grazers or my algae eaters too much algae in the form of algae wafers, then they tend to not be so vigorous as they're cleaning up the tank. If I feed them less algae wafers, they tend to look for more food and my tank will get cleaned up a little more. So I can use that as a gauge to when to sort of back off with the algae wafers. I notice the off-flux and the algae starting to accumulate in the tank again. I can kind of back off with the algae wafers. I've obviously been feeding more than I need to. Usually when I stop and back off with the algae wafers for a little while, I'll notice that the tank will start getting cleaner and cleaner and the algae will start disappearing. So if you've got a fish like a goldfish, they eat algae directly out of the water. There's nothing happier than a goldfish swimming around in green water. Every time they open their mouth, they're just bringing food in. They just eat the algae right directly out of the water all day long. So goldfish are a kind of fish that can find food within the tank. If you look at my Tennocona there that we just saw gobbling up some of those floating cichlid pellets on the surface, that is a kind of fish that cannot find food in this tank for himself. The gouramis will eat the plants. They'll also eat some algae. I've even seen the angelfish pecking on algae and nibbling on the surface of rocks and stuff, picking at stuff like that. The Tennocona is purely a predatory fish. It's a piscivore. It eats other fish or insects on the surface. But that fish is not going to find food in the tank. If I don't feed that fish, then it's not going to get fed. There's no way I can allow the tank to sort of compensate for my feeding when it comes to those kind of fish. If you've got other larger predatory type fish, it's going to be the same kind of situation. You're going to have to put food in there that's suitable for those fish. If you've got them trained to pellets or floating cichlid sticks or whatever you've got them trained to, that's fine. But that's the kind of food that you have to put in there. You can't allow something like that Tennocona to just swim around the tank and go a few days without giving it proper food. There's nothing in there for it to eat. It can't survive on eating algae or anything like that. It's just not set up to do that. You've got to give it food. So I try to find the balance between what fish I've got, what's going on in the tank. You know, again, if you've got a bare glass bottom tank that's all crystal clear and bright and clean, well, there's nothing in there for the fish to eat on. So you're going to, again, have to provide all of the food for those fish. My tanks have plants in them. They have offbucks growing. They have algae growing. There's all sorts of stuff in there. And over time, you'll get little microorganisms that are growing in the offbucks. I've got springbacks, which are a type of, it's not really an insect, but for lack of a better word, we'll just call them little tiny insects that live on the surface of the water. The rainbow fish will nibble at them and peck at them. I've seen that. I've seen the angelfish pecking at those. So all sorts of stuff becomes food in a fish tank, depending on what the fish is, what their normal food sources are, etc. And so again, it's just, you know, something to consider when you're feeding your tank. How much do you need to add to it, and which fish do you need to add more to? Which ones do you need to mix it up for? And then, of course, there's always the idea that we want to give our fish a good variety of food. So I don't always give them the same flake food. I give them sinking granules. I'll give them different treats of infusoria or I'll give them some freeze-dried bloodworms occasionally. There's just all sorts of different foods that I mix up, is what I'm saying, so that they're not getting the same food day in and day out. And that gives them a good variety in their diet and makes sure they're nice and healthy. I also tend to stick with the color-enhancing foods. I don't know if they really make a difference or not, but I often get compliments on how vibrant and beautiful my fish are, so I don't know. I'm not going to switch it up. I'm just going to stick with the color-enhancing foods because that's what seems to be working pretty well for me. So that's about all I can think of. My main point was that in a lot of cases our fish tanks provide some food for the fish already, and we don't need to worry about feeding them nearly as much as we actually do. And again, I'm well aware of the fact that I'm a little heavy-handed when I feed. That's not something I think I need to do. It's just sort of a bad habit of mine. So don't think when you see my feeding videos that that's how much food you really need to give your fish. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I think everybody's pretty much done. I'm going to get around, get the rest of the room fed, and that's going to be it for me for the evening. I'm going to say thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you're subscribed, and don't forget, of course, this one is my 125-gallon tank. So thanks again, and I will see you real soon on the next one.